is the main presentation. As Yoshi mentioned, there will be a little overview as to what we're trying to do around behavioural data, what we did in the hack, why we did the hack, and actually some Q&A at the end, as Yoshi mentioned. But often it's good to start with a case study, and it kind of sets the problem, sets the issue that's facing us. So we've framed a case that's ongoing in the States at the moment. And it's the first case that I'm aware of in the States where people have actually now been jailed for not predicting project outcomes accurately. So another way of putting that, and a much stronger way of putting that, is misleading on cost and schedule. Now, I don't want to get into trouble for saying something I shouldn't be saying here. So let's take this as an example. You can see on the screen there what's happened. Well, one of the directors is actually in jail. Others are facing jail as well, a much more serious jail. And the question we want to bring is around this concept. If people are hiding things from others, so what happened here? And this is just this is a generic thing from any project, but if you are the board, if you are the bank, if you are the board in an organization, the funding mechanism for a project, you will appoint a project director. That director will appoint a project team, a management team to work with him and her, and then you will appoint a group of people that will work on that project. Now, what possibly happened in this case is that the board, having appointed the project director, was confident in the ability, totally trusted the ability of that project director to tell the truth, to tell what was going on that project. Now, in this case, I can surmise that the project planner, the cost estimator, the cost controller, some of the senior engineers possibly started waving a flag pretty early on, saying, wait a minute, cost is going up, schedule's going up. It's not what we've baselined. It's not what the benefit case should be. So if that's the case, then the director, you would think, would pass that up the chain. That didn't happen. It sounds like the director said, no, leave it with me. Give me some time. I will sort it later. Give me some more time. And anyway, long story short, the company went into liquidation because there wasn't an active management process. And now, when I say others are facing 20 years, people on the board, it sounds like, are kind of getting accused of not doing enough due diligence. So the question is, if there are three groups of people, there's the board group, there's the project leadership team, and there's the experienced workforce. How if the experienced workforce is flagging a problem, they perceive the project is going wrong, and the director is claiming that it's not, it's all on track, how does the board get to find out? Should they get to find out? So one of the hypotheses we had was actually, well, what would lead to the event? How would we capture that perception and pass it in a non-threatening way, an anonymized way to the board? And what you can do is effectively intervene on a project before we ever possibly could with objective data. So can you turn some of that subjective perception things into something that you can tangibly take action to or with? And that was the rough premise of where we got to with setting up the app. For many of you used an app within the hackathon to do this. So can we quantify your feelings on how you think your project will achieve its benefits? And can you forecast that, and can we predict who is going to be the winner or the most accurate in forecasting their outcomes, and potentially who is wildly over optimistic and missed the outcomes? So you guys were effectively assessing your score, and there was a group of judges who you've just seen present what they thought the top 5 were, but we kind of judged everyone. So we know from the data who's optimistic, we know from the data who's pessimistic, and we know where the endpoints are. So what I'm going to do now is be quiet, but really what we want to do is encourage the entire community to think about how we forecast better with subjective data, as opposed to stuff that comes out of Primavera P6 or a cost reporting module, etc. So That's it framed. Over to Catherine for the how.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I'll just take you back a little bit, I think, just before we got to the point of doing the data analysis at the hack. And the group of people that you see here on the screen, Joe, myself, Jonathan, Alex, Yoshi, Donnie, and Kelvin, came together as part of the Project Data Analytics Task Force research pillar. As part of the meetings that we were holding, we started to discuss the missing link between project dashboards and project success. So the dashboard was supposed to be that golden chalice that improves our productivity or our project productivity. But instead, we found that after only a few months, potentially, they were left on the shelf, or they weren't quite performing or giving the results that we expected them to give. And there's several reasons for that, and there's multiple things that you can do about that. But one of those things that we think that we can potentially do about that is what we're here to discuss today. And it really does link back to that that framing piece that Alex just spoke about how do we know and understand different types of data. So project dashboards usually hold objective project data. So things that have already happened, a deliverable has been issued, material has been received or delivered. And when analyzed in isolation, that can't or doesn't necessarily provide the direction that a project needs of which way to go next or where to move. It always seems to be a move behind. And it's only once you sort of pick that information out of a sea of data within a dashboard can you start to reflect on what you could have done. And, as we can see from that previous example, what you could have done is sometimes too late. So let's think about then instead the combined knowledge and insights of a project team, the project team as a whole. That coffee machine chat about the lack of communication from your key vendor, or the desk conversation about slippage or not enough hours in the plan. What if we could access that information, that knowledge inside your team's heads, and take that as cultural behavior as the team and turn it into something that we could measure? So we can't necessarily remove the risk overall, but what we want to do is understand if perceptive data, that cultural behavior team data, can help direct us towards an easier route sooner than the objective data alone can. So these discussions that we held in this group led us to where we are today. We ran an experiment at Hack 15. We had a room full of people. We had access to data people working in teams on an end-to-end project challenge over 2 days. So it was quite a rare occasion where we can see a project from start to end over a 2-day period and analyze the data that we can take from there. So what did we want to know? What did we want to find out from the hack? Well, on the slide here you can see that we wanted to predict, or see if we could predict, who will eventually win the hack. We wanted to see if we could predict, or if teams could predict with their own forecast what the judges were then going to score them later. So can we forecast accurately, honestly, and successfully about the success of the teams that we're working in? And then finally, can we predict if a team will not be successful? And in some ways, that's the most important, because they're the teams that we need to intervene, that we need to support, that we need to give direction to. So next slide, please. So what we did was we called on Kelvin McGrath, and Kelvin is out of Sydney and has a really cool tool that can do just that. It analyzes sentiment from project teams' data, and I'm sure much more than that. But for the purpose of this meeting, that's what it does. There's some images there of the platform itself, the meeting quality tool that we used, and there's also a link to the Meeting Quality website if anyone wants to find out more about what this tool actually does. And if you just move to the next slide, there's some examples of the analysis that comes out of this tool based on the information that it collects from people. So we adapted this, or Kelvin adapted this for our needs, and we developed a set of questions that we hoped would provide the data that we needed to answer those questions that I've just gone over there. So we asked participants during the hack to complete 4 rounds of questions over the 2 days. And the data that we collected is just on the next slide. So we collected data around MQ profile. For that, we wanted to understand the relationship and the team makeup. And Donnie will explain a little bit more about the MQ profile soon. We collected data around team demographics. So we wanted to understand the confidence levels, the experience of the team members. We looked at behavioural insights over time. So that was on a scale of 0 to 100, and we could really judge sentiment across some set questions that we repeated and asked the 4 times. So we can start to see changes in that sentiment from the start of the project, the middle of the project, and the end of the project across each team member in the group. We collected free text responses to questions, and those again identify individual sentiment, and those were to be ran through the IBM Watson tone analyzer after collection. And then finally, we had the judges scoring, and that all enables us to compare the results of the individual teams' results against the final project outcome. So how did our teams do at accurately forecasting their challenge success? I'll pass over to Donnie to give you a bit more information.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you. Yeah, we don't have this presentation isn't about going through any of this detail. It's just to simply say what we were using. But we used this tool within Meeting Quality called MQ Profile, and it's disk-based, which some of you may have experienced already. The kind of red, yellow, green, blue. I'm going to use the word personality. It's not really. It is very simple, straightforward, but it's very similar in nature to insights, which I know a number of you no doubt will have completed. I think there's one more click, Yoshi, on this. And we used MQ Profile. I had developed this with Kelvin some time ago and have been using it for a few years. And we said, look, let's use this to give us an idea about what the different types of people are. As we all know, we're all unique. And this is a very crude way of simplifying things into 4 types of people. But we need to do something, otherwise it's a bit awkward trying to run a model with whatever it is, 7.5 billion combinations. So we were using the 4 types. We asked people to complete their profile. If you go over, Yoshi. And there was a sheet that we asked them to complete, and this was a point of reference that we asked them to. We're not going to show the screens that you completed on the app, but the bottom right was the example of what people completed on, and we also did sub profiles as well. So there was actually, you would choose like kind of red top right, and then you would say what's your secondary profile, and you could be red red or red yellow or red blue. So we came up with 16 different profiles for people. I won't say any more about that. Next slide, Yoshi. Now here's the interesting bit. This is an analysis of all the people that completed the MQ profile at the hack. So the first thing I guess you notice is there's a relatively similar spread across at least 2 or 3 of the profiles, one less so. So why? Well, I've just done a little bit of analysis to say, so this is the first bit, if you will, of the analysis that Catherine was talking about, which is, you know, the blues are typically analytical, systematic, task orientated. You would kind of imagine that they would be interested in this. They like processes, structure, they like quantitative necessarily above qualitative. So it does link to, yep, you can imagine there'd be more blues at an event like this than any other. Your reds, similarly, they'd be very goal orientated, but they would be, so that's a very different reason for likely attending the hack, but also the way that they use data as well. The yellows, very different again. They're all about possibilities and bringing people together, what could be achieved. So you can imagine the yellows and blues working together would be very different, but they can add and spark off each other. And then finally the greens, who are very typically very people-centric, are more in the relationship. There were only a few greens who were actually attended the event. Likely we could have predicted that in advance. So what we want to do is we want to be using this in the analysis, because this gives us, this is just one of 10,000 layers you could cut through a person, but it gives you a basis to distinguish between different types of people and how that impacts the choices that were made with all the other points of data that we've talked about. And I think next, Yoshi. And then here is an additional bit of analysis, which was, I'll just click on one more. I think there's a sentence as well, Yoshi. That's the lowest on the left and the highest scoring from the judges before there was a final assessment to allocate the who won and so on. So this doesn't necessarily equate to who actually won. It was the highest scoring in the first round of the judging. So what you can see is if the lowest was maybe not a good distribution of types of people, so it had 4 blue reds, kind of blue but the red secondary, and then yellow blue. So that was the lowest scoring, but the highest scoring, interestingly, had a complete combination of blue, red, green, yellow. We're not reading anything into it at the moment, but it's just interesting to start to see that you can use this, and it gives you some insights about why there will be different outcomes for different teams. And that I will pass over to Jonathan.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Donnie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think it was Donnie's audio. Jonathan.
Okay, brilliant. So, yeah, what I'm going to go through is essentially some of the results from the questionings that we did. So we're looking at, in this slide, the team demographics. So what we have here is we discussed about this concept of the profile, the MQ profile in terms of personalities. But this is now looking at the team demographic. So the couple of questions that we said here is about, is this your first hack? Are you a novice data person, or are you a leader? So what we're looking at here is there leaders? Is there lots of leaders in a team, or is there not many data leaders in the team? And just trying to get a sense of the team makeup and what actually works for a project hack. Now, in my experience, I remember my very first hack, and I didn't feel I can contribute that much. You know, I kind of sat on the periphery maybe, and maybe did some of the presentation. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. But then as you go through your hacks, you actually start to learn that actually, you know, jumping in could be a different thing. So, you know, you start to be a bit more bold and a bit more ambitious maybe with your skill set. So it's really interesting to try and understand the sort of demographics in this as well. Now, what I have on the screen, I think there's another click to press, Donnie. Sorry, Yoshi, if you wouldn't mind. And probably another one again. So there we go. So what I've shown on the screen there is essentially the one on the left is the high performing team, and the one on the right is the low performing team. There is no difference. So I think from the analysis that we've looked at in terms of the team demographics, whether it's your first hack, whether or not you're an expert in data, or whether or not you're a leader, there doesn't seem to be much different sort of correlation between the team makeup and then your performance overall. So that was something really quite interesting, but yeah, again, maybe not so much of a surprise. So the next thing to look at then is some of the other questions that we asked. So right in front of you is the full list of the questions that we asked. Now, 1 to 5 is pretty much the core questions that the judges are scoring as well. So if you were to tackle a hack, you'd probably look at these and say, if I'm going to be scored on that, then we need to make sure that our solution looks good against those 5 questions. The other 6 really the other 4 are ones that we discussed would be actually quite good to touch base with over a period of time across the project. And then this is where we're starting to sort of come towards the timeline and the trends over the 2 days. Now, just a little explanation, the actual app itself, it had a slider at the bottom, and that basically gave you the option to slide from left to right, low to high, on a grading scale between 0 and 100. What that does, it gives us a lot more granularity when you're looking at sort of artificial intelligence, which will hopefully come onto as the Hack 16, Hack 17 develops. So that just gives you an insight of the questions that we asked and kind of how we were scoring. Next slide, please. And again, a couple more clicks. Sorry, Yoshi, thank you. So what you have here then is essentially touch points through the day. So 4 points from 2 different teams, and you'll see their sort of scores increase, or you would hope, as they feel more confident, or if they feel more knowledge about the subject, or if they feel that their technology is getting better. And if I said who would be the top performing team, I probably would have been the one that's going upward on an upward trajectory. But as you can see here, it's actually the low performing team that has reached almost the peak of confidence, the peak of what they think their ability is on the subject. And the higher performing team, if anything, has actually gone the opposite way. So maybe they're actually questioning what they've got in terms of their solution. Or are they actually being more realistic about it and actually predicting closer to what the judges may have scored as well? So that was just something that's really interesting to come out of this. It's, again, it gives you a bit of questioning as to say, this is the things that we're measuring. Are they the right things that we're measuring? And I'm not too sure that we're quite there yet, but again, iterations through this process will help us. So something else to show you, which is something cool. We focused on one particular question, which is how cool is the technology? So this is something that normally gets the judges really excited. If they see a really cool technological solution, they may give you higher scores. The people themselves get a bit more buoyed about what they're doing. So what you have here is basically the entire group, so everybody doing the hack, represented in each different round. So you've got round 1 on the left all the way to round 4 on the right. And what you'll see through the histogram is that actually as they start the day, the technology, they feel maybe middling, sort of average in terms of how cool it is. But as you go through day 1 and then into day 2, predominantly most people have shifted towards the right. And they're actually getting to the point where they understand their solution, it's coming together, and actually they'd be able to say, yes, I'm really happy with the technical solution we've created. So again, more data to sort of look at as the timeline increases over your project. Next slide, please, Yoshi. Now, what we also did is we introduced some free text form sort of boxes, and you can actually get so much more insight from a free text box than you can necessarily with just straight scoring. We asked a series of 4 questions, and some of the responses here to 2 of them I'll go through, but this is the first one. What are your confidence levels around a team's performance potential for this challenge? So why we want to ask this is it's exactly about this psychological safety within teams. So are you comfortable about your team's performance? It's trying to get under the skin of actually what do you think? This subjective kind of opinion about your team's chances of succeeding. And what we got from this was, well, on the left there, as you can see, is the basic word cloud. But also with meeting quality, they produce an emoji cloud, which is another good way of looking at it as well. So you got the standard word cloud on the left, and then an emoji cloud with its components explained on the right. And as we can tell in the hack, lots of people really energized, really excited to be there. So yes, I think everybody was pretty confident that they had the right team around them, which is good feedback for the hack. Next slide, please, Yoshi. So another question we asked was, how would you feel about raising concerns in this group if you spotted something wrong? So again, psychological safety, it's about actually owning your own mistakes and admitting them when things are going wrong. Sometimes there are cultures where, this isn't something you do. If you might be a bit shy or not sure about your job if you were to raise a mistake. So we wanted to try and ask this question because I think that's very transferable into a project world, particularly if it's anonymized, particularly if it's fed back in some form of data that can help direct a project. So again, on the left is a standard word cloud, and on the right is your emoji cloud. Basically, people saying it's a piece of cake. Yes, I would. I'll feel very comfortable with raising my concerns to this group, which is really, really good to hear. So next one, please, Yoshi. And there's a couple of clicks. One more, I think, Yoshi. There you go. So what we've also managed to do, and this was again Kelvin McGrath at Meeting Quality did this for us. He managed to put the free text responses into a form of emotion measurement. So all of the text responses from rounds 3 and 4 have been analysed, and that's what the two visuals are showing you there. The one on the left is round 3, and the one on the right is round 4. Now, just to explain what this is doing, each one dot represents a phrase. So all of the phrases are represented by one of those dots. And the higher the percentage of that dot, the greater the intensity is of that emotion measurement. Okay, so basically, if it's 100%, it's stronger in its intensity on either the analytical or the confidence factor. So what you can see here then really is that as you go from round 3 to 4, generally people are getting more sad, they're getting less confident, and they're getting more tentative. So what does that mean for projects? As we're closing towards a deadline, are we starting to just generally get more emotive? Maybe there's more stress, more anxiety amongst the team. How does that impact project performance when you get to the closing stages? We don't know, but these are the things that we can now measure and develop into future hacks and maybe out onto projects. Next one, please, Yoshi. I think that's where I hand over to yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you
for an excellent look into the analysis. So a big part of the hackathon and this meeting quality sort of analysis, guys, was to see if we could effectively understand and maybe have some indication as to or predicting how the judges would score the solutions dependent on our own perceptions. So using kind of subjective scoring or self-reported scoring, what factors of that self-reported scoring would likely predict the judges' outcomes. So we wanted to see who would succeed at the hackathon. We wanted to see if we could predict the final forecast of their score. And so what we did was we took all that information that Jonathan kind of ran through earlier, and we looked at the self-reported scores of individual motivation, technological vision and prowess, subject knowledge, likeness to solve the challenge, benefits to others, group performance, solution adoption, and solution commercialization. So you all scored yourselves, or those of you who did complete it, scored yourselves on those different components. So we conducted a regression analysis to see where could we see kind of that causal influence on the judges' scoring. And what we found was that the only finding or the only self-reported score which was actually significant, so that kind of lesser than 0.05 p-value, was technology perception. So technology perception was the most accurate predictor of the judges' scoring. So the attendees who, in terms of their perception of how cool their technology was, more specifically, was that significant predictor. Similarly, in the final round of judging, so when the 3 judges kind of led that ordinal order of who won from the first team to the 5th team winners, a key factor in their judging was the clear vision set by the winners. So those top 5 and also those who placed 1st, 2nd, and 3rd potentially had very clear visions for their solution. So we can see that direct relationship between the perception of how cool the technology was and also the vision they had as perceived by themselves, but also by the judges. So I've got a scatter plot on the right there, so you can see the different teams and kind of the distribution. So how cool the technology was and the judges' average total scores. And despite that being not the strongest kind of correlation, looking at that visual, there was a positive correlation there that was significant after the linear regression analysis. So what we could assume from that is that that the solutions which were perceived to be more technically advanced or had a more technically advanced vision were also likely to be scored higher by the judges. So how does this apply to projects? And this is why I open up the floor to the team. So Alex, Jonathan, Catherine, and Donnie. How do we take this information and apply that within our projects?
I'm happy to attempt a response, Yoshi. Thanks. I think the important thing here is that you know, it wasn't the highest technological solution that won the judges' score. It was a balance. So it's the strongest indicator by far, but it's not the single answer. Projects are complex beasts. It's not just the one thing that's going to give you success. I think, you know, we're using the hack as an analogy for a project or multiple projects, and I think if you were to ask questions around, you know, this one here is about technology, but if you ask questions around projects, an easy thing to get your head around for any of you that know the project management book of knowledge that the APM puts out, you've got cost, you've got schedule.
Alex.
I think Alex has gone on mute.
Have I been talking that whole time and I've been on mute?
No, it was literally the last 5 seconds, Alex.
Okay, so I'll start with. I'll not start with the. Did I get to the cost quality triangle? The
No.
project management triangle. Okay, I'll start again then. So you hopefully are familiar with the APM's book of knowledge and how they define the triangle that they have, the cost on one side, quality on the other side, schedule on one side. And the size of that triangle is all about the size of the scope. So the bigger the triangle, the bigger the scope. Now, those are the sort of 4 typical questions that we could ask in this, with using this technology. How good is the schedule? How accurate is the schedule benchmark? How accurate is the cost benchmark? How close are you to meeting quality? And actually, how well is the scope represented? How well is that final scope going to be against your base scope, the benefit case? And if we can frame questions around that, and we can ask experienced people those sorts of questions, how close will the schedule be compared to the baseline today? It'd be really interesting to see how the experienced engineer or planner would think versus the project manager or project director versus the board or the bank that's funding that project. How would they all perceive the outcome to be? And then we measure those outcomes month in, month out to see where this perception changes rapidly. And where the perception changes rapidly, that's the point in which you intervene on a project. Yeah, we don't do that yet. And that's the piece this is the critical piece. If we see that perception gap suddenly and dramatically change from one period to the next, that's when we can step in. And that's a game changer, because that typically will happen before the objective data will tell you that. And you know, I'm putting a wet finger in the air, but I think that gap between what people see and what objective data sees is minimum a number of weeks, if not 2 to 3 months on big capital projects.
Thank you, Alex. I think, Donnie, have you come off mute because you want to say something to add, or?
Yeah, I was just going to completely challenge what Alex has said. No, I'm not really. It was going to be a kind of repetitious completely. I think it is I think Catherine's slide right at the beginning, we put it was kind of nirvana, where all this might go. Imagine if getting these bits of data, bringing the human aspects into it, etc. Imagine we had that, and imagine you're able to predict this. And you merge this. I mean, you know better, Yoshi, than any. You know, some of the people down in the bottom of this footer, you know, end plan and nodes and links and whatever. Imagine you start merging that kind of data with the good quality estimating and projections of the hard stuff. My goodness, you then get to you get a true representation of where a project will be in the future, and a way of actually dynamically assessing as you're working on it, how that may modify and change given sentiment, emotion, and so on, perception. It's an exciting place to go.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. And towards Jonathan, you've got a point as well.
Yeah, I think we don't touch on this too much, I think, when you, particularly with project management, but if you think about new starters and sort of, you know, new project managers in their early stages of their career, such a tool would be brilliant to understand where those teams are that need support. So if you do have teams that are maybe full of inexperience or sort of nurturing project managers, then again, this could highlight where that might sort of allow for interactions and sort of help and support to shape project performance. So yeah, I think I can see lots of interesting areas where this might help. And again, once you get under the skin of actually understanding why people react in certain ways, then maybe you can start asking other questions about, you know, why they not interact with data. You know, we're preaching here to a project data analytics community. We did this tool set across, you know, 200 people that were hacking over 2 days, yet not a lot of them were actually engaged with this tool and this data collection. You know, so again, it also begs a bit of a question to say that, are we measuring right things, and actually are there things that we just cannot necessarily right now today understand through a data lens? We'll get there, I'm sure we will, but again, it's iterations and sort of focusing in.
I know you don't want to mention, Yoshi, that not the next one is virtual, but the one after, of course, I think you're going to have Elon Musk's company there and everyone's going to get a chip fitted in the back of their neck. I'm not sure if I should have mentioned that or not, but if it does happen, then of course we'll be taking the data straight from everyone's spinal cord and we'll know for sure what's going on. I think when you were speaking there, Jonathan, what jumped to mind was the use cases. There are so many use cases for this. The application of it is really broad, and if anything, I'm sure I'm talking for the rest of our little team, is we might need to be very careful we don't get, oh my goodness, there's so many applications of it. Maybe stick to, as you've kept us directed as Alex, and one of them is about predictability, about project and timescale or something, you know, keeping a relatively narrow use case focus, because there are so many things you could get overwhelmed with them.
Yeah, I think one other big point to consider. When we establish PMOs, project management officers, the people that govern the projects that are being run, we've got to, you know, in that typical community, you've got some very, very intelligent people that have run many projects, experienced people. They've seen a lot of this before. But what we typically do is we typically deploy the peer review team, and let's rebadge them for a moment as the intervention team. We typically get that team together and go onto a project to intervene where we just know it's going wrong. And we do that really, you know, 70% of the way through. It's quite often, you know, rule of thumb on an earned value basis. We get them in quite late. And really what you're doing is you're getting your brightest people to intervene on a project that really you'll leave them with a bunch of actions, and actually what they actually really need is a bunch of people to come and help do the stuff. And what you really need is those really clever people, the people that have seen it and done it before, to stop the train wreck happening earlier. So rather than intervening and putting your best people on at 70%, will the perception of the project's success allow you to intervene and use that same team at 50%? And all those red flags that you were seeing at 70%, presumably might be 1 or 2 reds and many ambers at the 50%. But can you intervene and can you prevent the reds becoming as red as they would have got? I'm not saying you're going to make a miracle and save the project, but can you make them less red? And that is a huge, you know, huge benefit to any project where you've got those caliber of people intervening early and reshaping and reformatting and restructuring, you know, the delivery mechanism of the project. It's a really important piece of work.
Excellent, thank you, guys. It's like you mentioned, Alex, as well. It's if something's bad, and how long is it bad for? And I think if you intervene early, if something is bad, you obviously want to stop that or mitigate that, but you also want to mitigate how long it's bad for, and kind of intervening a lot earlier with kind of some of this human insights that really supports that. Donnie, I think you want to mention one more thing before we moved on. You're on mute as well, Donnie.
Not a bad thing often. It was actually on Friday, we got a call with a certain client in the nuclear world, speaking with the head of risk and head of assurance. And of course, I was going to be pointing them at this. Now, this is kind of right out, you know, we know we're developing just to thinking. But I think in another way of saying what you've just said, Alex, is the kind of world and the project is often risk, because that, or risk or opportunity, it's the looking ahead bit. But the external partly is then the assurance. And you're right, it's, I know Martin Paver's got a big bee in his bonnet about how you treat risk and deal with risk. But there's also a whole thing about the world of assurance. You know, how do people find the data to allow them to know to intervene? You ideally want the project to do it, not assurance people. But if they haven't done it, then it's assurance people get data to allow them to do it. Oh, it's again, the use cases make my head hurt thus. So yeah, so that was it, Yoshi.
Excellent, thanks, guys. And just following on in terms of how we can draw this further. Now, the bottom one, the sentiment analysis, Jonathan already covered as part of the meeting quality. I think the guys use IBM Watson for that. But looking at some of the notes before that. So one thing we're looking to do in the future, because a lot of the participants completed kind of the screening or the test multiple times throughout the event, and like Alex mentioned, through the stages of a project, you're more likely to have your perception will change. So we're looking to see if we can analyze the differences between the rounds of scoring, potentially comparing those with an ANOVA, potentially to see if they're significantly different from each other, but also to see at what point can we identify when perception is most accurate in terms of it alluding to project success in that sense. We're also looking to see if we can use the Hack 15 scoring to predict those within Hack 16. So if we can take some of those scores and see by taking that information, can we indicate or potentially predict the project success based on stakeholder perception of the next hackathon as well. So some of the things that we're looking to draw further, but it'll be great to see kind of what some of you guys think and some of what the community think and others who we show this to, as to how we can take this forward effectively. I think, Donnie, I'm passing back over to you regarding your BBC News slide. Donnie, if you're there, I don't know if you're frozen. You might be. I mean, Donnie's either doing an excellent mime. Oh, he's back. Here we go.
Oh, right. Yeah, it seems that I thought my thing had my computer had frozen for a few minutes. Just to take this to the extreme, this is a BBC article that came out, and for those of us who are involved in the infrastructure world and other worlds, you'll know about digital twins. Well, I think this is rather optimistic, but it was an article about, imagine you might have a thinking digital twin within a decade. Especially that was interesting about the story about Google recently with the personal assistant who seems to have become sentient lately. Well, so I was going to say a political point there, but I won't. So you get a thinking digital twin. Imagine that. So we're only talking about at the moment taking a slice through and asking people about what their type is, and then a couple of other bits of data. Imagine you were able to interact an individual to individual, to a team, to a project, to a program, to whatever, and actually understand people. I mean, again, the use cases just boggle the mind. So yeah, that was a little link there if you really want to go left field about what is possible, 10, 15 years from now in terms of the data that would be available from a human point of view.
So thanks, Donnie. We've got some questions for you guys. I'm aware that we've got not many attendees, so we can look at the interaction for some of this, but we have got a Menti. I think I need to click the slide a few times. We've got a Menti, guys, to kind of check some interaction with you, and also ask you some questions in terms of some of your thoughts on what we gathered, and also on this presentation. So if you can log on to menti.com, you can use scan the QR code. It will take you straight there. And I think you'll use the code 75957457. We'll keep it on the screen for a bit to let you guys jump on, and then I will also get onto the Menti myself. Well, actually, I think, Catherine, you've got to share the Menti, haven't you?
Yeah, I can share that.
Excellent, perfect.
I can present it. So I think if we think back, Jonathan mentioned a little bit earlier about the participation of the data collection throughout the hack, and I've had some conversations with projects people and operations people about this. The potential of this tool, or the potential of taking behavioural insights, and for all it's astounding, for all it feels like it could give us some really insightful information and improve our projects, we've got a concern that do people have time? Are people already overstretched? Are they busy? Will they be honest? Will we get accurate and consistent and honest data out of our people? So, and you know, that fear was almost recognized throughout the hack, because we saw sort of large participation during day one, and it trailed off during day two as people maybe became more worried, more tense, more pressed for time through the development of their projects. So while you're in this Menti, if you could think about it in terms of, if you're on a project, you know, the hack is one thing, you're in a team, you're in a group, it's 2 days, you've got the potential to win a prize, compared to you're at work, you've got activities to do, you're potentially raising concerns to your manager, to your colleagues, etc. So yeah, the questions there, if we think about that in terms of how honest or how capable we would be, or how much time we would have to engage in something like this. I will present, and I'll steal the sharing if that's okay. We've only got 2 responses so far, so it would be great if people can. I don't think I can share my screen, actually. Only meeting organisers and presenters can share. So
I'll have a quick look, yeah. Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds. Just changing the options on here, hopefully.
So the first question was, how honest would you be when you're confident of your project performance? And if you think you would be honest, then you can go to the strongly agree side. And if you think that you would be less honest, then go to the strongly disagree side. And then would your honesty, I suppose, change when you're unsure of your project performance? And would it change again if you were worried about your project performance? So you're more likely to engage and be honest when you're worried or when you're confident, I think, is what we're trying to understand here.
Cool. You should be able to share that, Catherine.
I can. I will do that now.
Yep, perfect.
So we can see there that the level of engagement and honesty maybe reduces down when we're unsure, but picks back up a little bit when we're worried, which is a good sign, I suppose. I'll move it on to the next one. We've got 7 participants here, so it's worth moving on. So the next one is, what incentives are needed for all team members to complete? So again, potentially thinking of the hack, or thinking in real project terms, you know, we had some teams where some members participated throughout all 4 rounds and others didn't. Other teams where the whole team participated, others where the whole team dropped off. So what do we need to, what do we need to do? What value does an engineer or a project controller or a data analyst need to see in inputting this data? What value do they need to get out of it? What is their incentive? for scoring them. That's interesting. So put up almost a leaderboard. Comparison to outcomes, to seeing the results. Group cohesion, maybe a little bit of group competition. Believing in the project. So yeah, there's some good responses there. Thank you for that. So I'll just move on to the final question. We've just got one more Menti question here. And we've already got some responses, which is great. So how could we identify the sentiment without asking people to do the additional work or expecting them to be honest? So how can we ensure that we get consistent, accurate, quality data from people's knowledge, from people's minds? So we have something similar to the cleanliness surveys at airport toilets, quick pulse style touch points. So that's where it's like a green, amber and a red face that you just press. So I like that idea. Could we do analysis on meeting minutes? Those are normally already created and just archived, which is a really good point, actually. I like that idea, and pull that through for sentiment analysis. Circulate the same online checkbox using an online check back form with questions. There's no shortcut. We need to tell people they need to fill it in. So this is a directive. This person is a red, I assume. It needs to be quick and easy and motivate people to accurately score. So maybe some gamification in there. Anonymous surveys, narration at meetings and using transcript to analyze. Whoever scores closest to outcomes get ranked highest by a model. Those score lowest outcomes get ranked lowest by a model. So again, a bit of gamification put into there, maybe some prizes for that. So great, thank you for those responses. And use data from wearables, which is, I mean, that's a great idea.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't spell wearables on my phone. But I'm just conscious I've got a whoop on, and I'm looking forward to getting an Apple Watch, and you know, it predicts, in theory, all sorts of things. So it would likely know your emotional state at any point during the day. So, you know, imagine doing that and sharing that as part of a team and data being collected. It's a bit scary. So I'm sure there's kind of GDPR conversation to have, but it's all possible, isn't it?
Mm. Excellent. Is that the end of the Menti, Catherine? It
is, yes. Thank you. Thanks for contributions of people.
I think there's some excellent insights in there, guys. Now, just to move on for the final component, I mean, we're doing really well for time, actually. We've got 15 minutes for some questions from you guys. So if you guys want to put anything in the chat, and we'll pick any of those questions up.
Yoshi, just I think there was one more slide, and the only reason being to show that was just simply to the what's next. Yeah, sorry, Catherine, I don't know why you want to just cover. All right, I'll just keep going. Is what we're going to do is developer thinking further around this. It's got us all excited and intrigued, as you can see. And then back to Alex's point, nobody wants to be going to prison. So if we can help people not go to prison and collect their £200, for those who know what I'm talking about, then that'd be great. And it's the practical help. That first point hopefully will then lead us to carry out further analysis. And Kelvin has kindly offered to help us with that. And Yoshi, you're doing the same, because some of this is jointly between the actual analysis between yourself and that, and also finish with the what do we take to challenge 16 and develop this. So that was it. I just thought I'd finish up what we're actually going to do next, and help, I assume, we'd be more than happy to accept an input from people.
Excellent. Thank you, Donnie. So guys, I think we've got some questions in the chat already, so I'll stop sharing my screen and present some of those to the guys, and we'll go through that. We've got one question at the moment from James, and it's, how do we prepare ourselves not to face possible litigation? Probably a question for you, Alex. I think I can see you smiling.
You know, I think in industry we see very often point estimates, i.e. one answer. You know, when you're forecasting any kind of project outcome, and you say it's going to cost you £10 million, £100 million, whatever it is, that can't be an answer. No one's going to suggest that there is an answer. It needs to be a range. You know, yes, at some point in time you will get a pot of money, but that needs to sit within a range of outcomes. So I think the process is very important. There's a whole bunch of work being done around, you know, standard estimates, Monte Carlo style estimates, reference class forecasting estimates. There's a whole different range of approaches that you need to look at. But what the process is about as important as the outcome. And if you've gone through a right process that's kind of recognized, peer reviewed, that type of thing, you can't go far wrong. I think if you are known to mislead, or if you're found to mislead, i.e. omit whole stuff out of an estimate, or choose to suppress bad news, and you're found out, you will end up, you know, I mean, there's not a case in the UK, but there's been 2 cases in Australia. There's a case in America that we've shared. People are going to jail, and you know what's happening is that will continue because we now have so much more data. Projects are collecting so much more data. It's much more tangible who made the decisions and who didn't make the decisions. The data is almost there to actually implicate people for doing the wrong thing. So what we need to do is frame it really, really well and make sure that we don't do silly, obvious things that actually, unfortunately, have happened in our industry before.
And maybe just to build on that, Alex, very much more, very topical right now, slightly away from the project predictability bit, but if you bring quality into it and a little bit of scope, there are inevitably people going to go to jail around the Grenfell inquiry. And, you know, if you saw, I think it's, well, I don't want to say about how good about that. There is somebody has done a summary of all of every key point that's come out, and they've summarized it and they've given the point. There's 50, 60 points, every one of them, the interview, whatever, and you literally, you look at it and you go, that person should go to jail next because they misled when they were asked about the quality of this, whatever. So we're going to potentially have a very, very real and tangible example, not quite around the prediction of time and costs and so on, but people are going to go to jail because they misled and so on, and hurrah to that.
So this community is all about, you know, this community, it's about predicting. Yes, we talk about data analytics. It's actually reframe that a moment. It's about predicting project outcomes. It's about stopping the train wrecks happen. It's about preventing projects getting worse than they are today. Yeah, that's why we're here. That's what we're trying to do, and that's the focus we need to do. And the behavioural side of things is super important, because for me, as we've said before, and as I saw a whole bunch of thumbs pop up saying that they kind of agreed with my sentiment, what we perceive or how we perceive a project outcomes to be happens earlier than the data tells us it's going to be. And this mix between real hard data and who we are as people need to act on data to make things happen, make things change, improve project performance. It needs to be a mix. We need that human element and the data to come together to improve. And what we can't do is look in isolation. The data is going to solve everything. It's that mix and blend of things coming together that really hopefully get us to the next level.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Also, another question. So we're looking at, when we deal with kind of human data, we're looking at data which is kind of input and it's quite subjective. So it's all based around perception. So in line with that, what are your thoughts on standardizing the criteria for project success?
What can you just ask? It depends what we mean by standardizing.
So when you look, so in terms of your perception of project success, so we look at the judgment Project Hack.
So it wasn't rhetorical, it was a broader question, because it was standardized between a nuclear submarine and a house extension, and 2 house extensions completely different. That's the concept of standardizing gets really tricky. But I do take the point is, if you had it completely standardized, then you could start applying models in a more meaningful way. In fact, actually, we're back to it actually needs human input to modify the model, which we can get as fixed as we possibly can, but it's still like it needs to be modified each time and some intelligence applied to it, because a lot of projects are pretty unique. But I do think it would be great to have it standardized.
I'm not sure anyone's clever enough to know how best to start a project. I think we've probably all got some really good ideas as to how we should start projects, but I don't think, I don't have the answers. Anyone on the screen here, we don't. None of us have all the answers to how we best deliver projects, because actually, I might have a really small niche of what I'm brilliant at, but it's not across the board. My team hasn't got that across the board, and what we can do is with the sort of power of big data is that the data can tell us what good looks like. It can see where we start, it can see where we end, it can look at any point in between, and it can tell us what good looks like. So I think we need to help shape and point it to get going, but hopefully over time it'll tell us where we need to improve just by knowing. And I think, Donnie, you pointed out a couple of vendors earlier on in their logos. That's broadly what they're doing. They're looking at huge data sets and looking for what's good and what's not so good and what's bad, and nudging people to do the good stuff. Now, what we're advocating here is, okay, that's going to happen. That technology is there for that to happen. That's great, but our hypothesis is that comes after, when we perceive project to be going good, bad, or indifferently. So how does that all mix together? And can we, I mean, intervening 2 months earlier on a project that lasts for 12 months or 24 months, how much value is that? That's a lot of money.
So thanks, Alex. A few more questions here, guys. So there's a question here around the risks. So what risks are there associated with capturing behavioural data? Quite a broad question.
Well, I'll make a go at it. I can tell you, if Kelvin was on, I'm sure he'd be able to tell us far more, because you're into the basics of the quality of it. I think you touched on, Yoshi. In one way you can get around it is it's not just a person making an assessment. You get a team assessing the person, so they may think they're X, but somebody else may think they're Y. That kind of deals with the quality, but the issues about accessibility of it. I mean, we did a piece of work recently for an organization that was around kind of a little bit of competency, and oh my goodness me, I think it took longer to work out how we were going to get access to do any form of analysis around the competency data than it was to develop the whole model, implement it, and work the mechanisms out, because it was who saw what and what. So it's a minefield about trying to do, not to end in a low, but it's a minefield for us to try and to use this in a living environment without it being anonymized. We anonymized all of this, and I know that we made that point at the hack, and Catherine and Jonathan did the same. Everything is anonymized. We don't know who they were. In fact, we couldn't, because of the way the data was gathered. But my goodness, does it get awkward beyond there?
And that comes to my last question here, Donnie, for you guys, and it's what do you believe will encourage the adoption of behavioural data within projects? And I think Catherine kind of touched on this within the Menti, but yeah, what do you believe will encourage the adoption of behavioural data within projects?
I think the main thing that encourages adoption of anything really is value, and is a vision of success, I suppose. So it needs to be proven to work, and it needs to be proven to add value. And once it does that, and that can be communicated around, then more and more people will adopt it. The majority of projects and groups will think that's a nice idea, but I'm busy, I've got these other things to focus on. And it's only when you can actually show them some tangible, like this project pulled back, improved, made higher margins, performed better, that people start to sort of take that on themselves. And you need those sort of lighthouse projects to go and do that work. And I think another side of it comes back to the question that you asked previously as well about what are the risks about taking in people's data, personal data. And it's not just the risk about quality and accuracy and consistency, it's the risk of GDPR, it's the risk of holding information about people, people leave the team, people come back onto a team. How do your projects people feel about providing this data, and do you almost give a big brother sort of scenario in your projects and make people withdraw from a team rather than feeling more psychologically safe and secure in the team? So I think there's a lot of angles there.
Excellent, thank you, Catherine. Jonathan, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think Catherine's stolen my thunder a little bit, but I again, it's bringing there's a step before. So in terms of linking what we've discussed today and this element of measuring people and the human performance around projects and turning that into improving project delivery, there's a step before, which is actually being psychologically safe to do that. And I think that's a bit of a footprint amongst the team to actually be comfortable that actually if they raise their hand to say that there's a mistake, or if they want a great idea to get forward to everybody, it's that ability to do it, and it's not that death by consensus. It's a little bit of everything. And I think once you get a team that's actually understanding how the makeup of everybody else and how they all interact with each other makes higher performing teams, then that's when you can then really start to sort of score these metrics and make interventions to actually keep driving that performance up. I think my experience with that is that I, through my career, have jumped to many different roles, and I spoke to Donnie at length about this. Is that if I wake up one day and I do the MQ profile, another day I'll be in a different box, and another day I'll be in a different box. So again, adding another complexity to this level is that people operate in different circles depending on what they're faced with. I think recognition of your preference, recognition of somebody else's preference, and then that ability to adapt, that is where you then really start to shape the teams to look like that MQ profile of the high performing team, the one that's got the best judges scoring with the all-rounded team makeup.
Thanks, Jonathan. So it's almost a bit like looking at state and trait effectively with some of these responses, because, and again, this is a question of Donnie. Donnie's just gone on mute just now, but it's a bit like if we're saying that in regards to the DISC profile and the way that people score themselves is kind of state driven, there will be other tools out there which would say this kind of looks at your personality type, right, which might be more of a trait. So on that basis, you might see differences in people's perceptions of their projects and the implications on kind of the success of their projects, looking at kind of straight state sort of methods and kind of trait methods. But then how do you know which one is more applicable within the project environment, because they change so quickly?
Well, sorry, I keep dropping in and out. My network seems to be low. It's 3 other people hammering the broadband, obviously, in the house. But it's why I have just one, because as we see, if it is actually collecting, if it's as easy to collect the data as we've said, okay, there's a completion issue. Why would you not be getting exactly that kind of information? And the key bit, I know Kelvin's very key, is dynamically. It's not once every blue moon. It's not your quarterly surveys or anything. This is as dynamic and as frequent as you can reasonably get, and it's appropriate.
Excellent. Thank you, Donnie. So guys, it has just hit 8 o'clock, so which is excellent timing. Just want to say a big thank you to all the speakers, Alex, Catherine, Jonathan, Donnie, for coming in onto today's presentation and giving a lot of insight into the behavioural data and its uses within our projects. Also a big thank you to all the winners. I know some of them might have dropped off by now, but a big thank you to everyone. And yeah, I think we'll conclude here. But thanks, guys. And like I mentioned, we are kind of putting the meetups on a call for a bit for the summer period, but we'll be back at the later end of this year, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks.